Students, we're going to start a new topic today, which is religion and society in Arab Sindh, and particularly we will look at conquest and conversion. The reading is Derryl Maclean, which I will share with you later. So, after a brief introduction about the coming of the Arabs in Sindh, we will proceed to conquests and conversions in Sindh. So about 4 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad, the Arab Muslims appeared as a force in the region of Sindh when Thaqafi, who was the brother of the governor of Bahrain, conducted a maritime raid on the port of Derryl. For the next 75 years, the Arabs continued their advance eastwards, raiding and then annexing portions of Maclean, which was this arid, mountainous western region of Greater Sindh. Finally, in 711, a large Muslim army under the command of Muhammad al-Qasim al-Thaqafi entered the Indus Valley. He was only about 17 years old at the time. By the time of his early recall and his very early death in 1714, Qasim had made possible the conquest of entire province of Sindh up to the city of Multan. Sindh became the eastern limit of the Arab campaigns of conquest, and for 3 centuries Arabs exercised authority in Sindh, first as governors appointed directly from the Umayyad and Abbasid courts, and then as independent rulers from the Quraysh tribes. The Arab domination of Sindh would persist till this region was annexed by the Ghaznavid Turks in the first quarter of the 11th century. So there was this long period of Arab rule in Sindh extending from 711 to 1025 CE. The region that is termed Sindh corresponds historically for that region that was termed Sindh by Arab historians and geographers, and it doesn't correspond exactly to this province which is in Pakistan. So this area that the Arab geographers included was entire tract of the Trans-Indus, from Punjab to the Indus Delta, as well as areas of Maclean, which is in modern Balochistan, and Turan, which is modern Kelat and Kutchi plains. So Arab Sindh was almost, since it's spreading all the way to Punjab, so it was equivalent to, in extent, to present day Pakistan, with the exception of certain areas in the far north and northwest. So to understand the Arab conquest and also then conversion here, there are 4 related themes. One has to see what are the non-Muslim religions and sects at the time of the Arab conquest. Then what are the various mechanisms for encouraging or impeding collaboration and conversion. Then one could also study the Islamic preoccupations of Sindhi Muslims, and there was a rise of the Ismaili state in Multan towards the end of the Arab period. Some sources which are important for this phase and region is include the Chachnama, which is a Persian translation of an earlier history of Sindh, which was written in Arabic. And it has account of the pre-Islamic Buddhist and Hindu dynasties. It has also the history of the initial Arab raids in Maclean, and it chronicles the campaigns and conquests of the Arabs. The Chachnama was compiled by this Arab scholar of the name of Ali bin Hamid bin Abi Bakr al-Kufi, and he was from the city of Uch. And around 1216, he wanted to write a history of the Arab conquest of Sindh to improve his prospects at the court of Nasir al-Din Kabaja. So, for the material, to gain the material for this, he travelled to the twin towns of Aror and Bakar, where he met the Qazi of the region, and the Qazi showed him an Arab history of Sindh, which had been in his family for many generations. And Kufi, instead of writing an independent history, translated this into Persian, adding an introduction to it and dedicated it to the vizier in the hopes of obtaining patronage. So this Kufi's Persian translation has survived, and it's referred to as Fathnama-i Sindh, Minhaj al-Din wa al-Mulk, Minhaj al-Masalik, Tarikh-e-Qasimi, and popularly the Chachnama. Two major historiographic traditions are expressed in the Chachnama: the indigenous Brahmanical and the classical Arab. It is a sole source which relate this Brahmanical tradition, and also it has then detailed classical Arab tradition in it. So, local historical tradition is in the first quarter of the text, which covers the Buddhist Siharsi dynasty, then the revolt of the Brahmin Chach, and the reign of the Silide dynasty, which continued up to the time of the Arab conquest. This first section is in contrast to the later section. It does not have any information about its transmitters, and it has no disparaging descriptions of non-Muslim religions, and it has more of the romantic and mythic types of material, usually connected with early medieval North Indian historiography. Significantly, this section shows an awareness of the terms and concepts of Hinduism and Buddhism. And this portion of the text seems to be an independent Brahmanical history of the family of Chach, which was possibly oral and similar to this local chronicles of royal dynasties in Western India. The most extensive and detailed historical tradition expressed in the Chachnama is the Arab, and the compiler was conversant with this Arab tradition of the conquest, which can be seen in other early historians, Baladhuri, Ibn Khayat, Tabari. The other Arab sources only give some descriptions of this final battle between the Arabs and Dahir, whereas the Chachnama takes over 20 pages about for over this battle, outlines each day's events, gives variant traditions, names of participants, and the Arabic poetry which was composed in this context of this conflict. Besides the Shachnama, there are many other Arabic sources which are significant. One of them is the comprehensive Muslim history, the voluminous Tariq al-Rasul wal-Mulk of Abu Ja'far Muhammad Jarir al-Tabari. It was written around 922 CE. It does not give details about this conquest of Arab Sindh, but there is detailed historical traditions about the political affairs of Sindh during the time of the late Umayyad and early Abbasid periods. So there are other kinds of narratives which are given here. For example, there is mention of the pure soul revolt in Upper Sindh during the Caliphate of Al-Mansur. Now, since you all have done social formations in your first, in your second semester, where you would have done the rise of Islam and the Umayyad and Abbasid Caliphate, so I'm not filling you into details about that external political history. You should be broadly familiar with these terms. There are also important Ghaznavid historians for Sindh. Abu Nasr Muhammad al-Utbi. Then there are others, al-Dahak Gardizi and al-Biruni. The Tarikh al-Yamini of Utbi and the Persian Zain al-Akhbar of Gardizi have information on Sindh and preserve the viewpoint of the Ghaznavid courts, which was the Ghaznavids had finally conquered Ismaili Multan. The Ismaili perspective on the events in Multan can be seen in two works written by Al-Numan bin Muhammad, who was the chief Qazi of the Fatimid Caliph Al-Muiz, and these versions are around 973 CE. However, the focus is on disputes among the Ismailis of Sindh around the middle of the 10th century. Sindhi historians writing in Persian at a considerably later date also discuss this early Arab period. For example, the Mughal poet, historian, physician Sayyid Muhammad Masoom Nami Bhakari, 1601 CE, wrote a history of Sindh, Tarikh-e-Masumi, in which the first 4 sections narrate the Arab conquest. For the period between the rise of the Arab dynasty and the Ghaznavid conquest, there is substantial sources which are the works of Muslim travelers and geographers, a number of whom actually visited Sindh. So we have Ishtakhari, Ibn Hawkal and Makdisi, who are primary exponents of the genre of descriptive geography known as Al-Masalik wa Al-Mamalik, that is the routes and the provinces. And they all devote a chapter to the province of Sindh. Basing his work on the lost atlas of Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, 933 CE, and his own travels, Abu Ishaq Ibrahim al-Ishtakhari, who died around 951 CE, provided a relatively comprehensive depiction of the region of Sindh, its towns, routes, and its noteworthy customs. There is also the work of Al-Nasibi around 988 CE, which is called Kitab Surat al-Ard, and there is the work of Ibn Hawkal, which follows the text of Ishtakari closely and reproduces it. And also there are corrections, amplifications, and important additional information. The pro-Fatimid geographer and traveler Shamsuddin Muhammad Ahmad al-Bashari al-Maqdisi died around 988 CE. Also was indebted to this previous account of Ishtakari, and he visited the Indus Valley between 977 and 985 CE and was a perceptive observer, and his representation of cities and itineraries of the region is part of this descriptive geography. And Maqdisi added information on commerce, religion, culture, and society, which was not found in either Ishtakari or Ibn Hawkal. There is also the account of Arab scholar Al-Masudi, who traveled in Sindh in 915 CE and recorded his impressions in his works combining history, geography, and travelogue. Masudi provided an invaluable account of the Indus Valley at the turn of the century. Pre-Islamic Sindh had Buddhist practices, and the different Hindu sects, predominantly the Pashupat Shaivism, was popular there, and there were different sects of Buddhism. So the debate surrounding Arab Sindh centers on this question of conquest and conversion. The questions revolved around the methods utilized by the Arab Muslims in conquest of and conversion of Sindh. Two perspectives had emerged regarding this. There were the early British administrator historian views and the Indian nationalist views that both conquest and conversion took place either solely or primarily by the sword. The other view was the Indian Muslim modernist and Pakistan nationalist view that the conquest was largely and conversion was also. This view is not clear in the book what is written here actually. The Indian Muslim modernist and Pakistan nationalist view is that the conquest was there, but the conversion was wholly peaceful, entirely peaceful. These perspectives are based on this mutually exclusive perception of what religion of Islam is. And the British historians were comparing the religious policies of the Arabs in Sindh with those of the British when they were governing the province. And the Indian nationalists perceived the Arab conquest as only the first in the long and sustained Muslim onslaught, which was followed by the British occupation. And in the Indian nationalist view, this resulted in restraining the Indians, which basically then would refer to Indians as Hindus, from developing the social and economic promise that was inherent in the Gupta period. On the other hand, the modern Indian Muslim and Pakistan nationalists read this conquest as representing the best of pristine Islam, which is contrasted to the Muslim Turkish conquests, and which is seen as a example for modern Muslim behavior in India. So one major earlier standard view was that there were coercive conversions, which was a direct consequence of militant nature of Islam, and this view was given by this early colonialist historian H.M. Eliot, who had also translated the various histories of Sindh. This is unfortunate because his translations were used by many others, and he perceived Islam as a religion of terror and devastation and murder, and therefore his discussion of conversion was within this kind of a paradigm. So he built a story of terror, torture and circumcision, and also spoke of two other means of conversion. One, harsh taxation of non-Muslims, and two, the lack of justice provided to them in the Muslim judicial system. So he argues that the poll tax jizya was levied on non-Muslim, which led to wholesale conversions, because the tax was always collected with rigor and punctuality and with insult. And he also speaks about the Muslim public tribunals, the courts of the qazis, which were also the means of extortion and forcible conversions, because non-Muslims could not have obtained equal justice in these courts. The problem is that Eliot does not draw support for his views from any of the primary sources. His views are based on the ideas of British travelogues, which refer to Sindh at the time of the British conquest, which were written a millennium after the arrival of the Arabs. So there is no support for his views from contemporary sources of Sindh. The early archaeologists and historians working in Sindh also built this image of this violent and coercive nature of Muslim presence there. For example, if a Buddhist site was discovered in ruins or fragments or the Buddhist sculpture were covered in fragments, it was assumed that this was due to the Arab Muslim iconoclasts. That is, they were destroying the icons, or there would be other evidence that if a stupa did not have a relic casket, it was because the Muslims had plundered it. But they ignored the fact that there are very few stupas in India who actually retained their relic caskets. So this kind of a view continued into the early 20th century, when we have archaeologist Dayram Sahani, who wrote that countless Brahmanical and Buddhist religious buildings were destroyed in Sindh by Muhammad al-Qasim, who, as we know, was very young and he died in 4-5 years of his conquest. All these writers are not able to prove any of their assertions. There is no evidence that there was any destruction that was brought about by the Arabs in Sindh. These colonial views persisted. There were other views like the Christian missionary Murray Titus, who wrote his thesis on the conversion in India, and he reduced the complex factors which led the Arabs to invade Sindh to the single religious motive, that is, striking a blow at idolatry and polytheism and of establishing Islam. Possibly Titus was influenced by his own missionary notions concerning spread of Christianity, and he pictured Islam in the same vein. And further, he states that the Arab Muslims in Sindh were intolerant and they had a wild fanatical zeal. But Titus, while writing of the initial Arab conquest of the city of Derryl, gives this account of forcible circumcision of the Brahmins of the captured city, and that how various were put to death, but he did not give any source from where he built this picture of the supposed mass circumcision and conversion at Derryl, and none of the primary sources refer to such an incident, because something like this would be really significant and big enough to find mention in the kind of primary sources which detail the Arab presence in Sindh. Wherever the primary sources provided evidence of tolerance, for example, the report in the Chachnama that the Thaqafite commander, the Thaqafites are the Arabs who conquered Sindh, they were the Thaqafites. The Thaqafite commander permitted the non-Muslims to rebuild their temples. So this kind of evidence was dismissed by these early histories on some kind of spurious, insignificant reasons. Nonetheless, these views developed by the colonialists persisted and were taken up with zeal by the Indian nationalist historiography, who completely adhered to this notion that the conversions in Sindh were forced conversions. For example, we have R.C. Majumdar, who is a major exponent of this view. Indian nationalists disagreed over effects and duration of coercive conversion. So, according to Majumdar, because conversion was forced, it was not very stable, and Hindus and Buddhists who had been forced due to sword took the first available opportunity and very early on to return back to their religion. And by 750 CE, Islam lost its footing in Sindh. On the other hand, C.V. Vaidya equates with becoming Muslim with becoming foreign, and concludes that conquest of Sindh meant conversion of the people and their permanent enslavement. In certain writings, a variant of this forced conversion theme can be seen in terms of a progressive degeneration. For example, L.H. Ajwani and others who allege that the Arab Muslims brought no constitutional doctrine or higher culture or superior art or language, So there was subsequent cultural degeneration along with the change to religion that happened in this province. A more sophisticated variation of the militant conversion thesis was also developed. Proponents of this view link together the early Arab raids on Maclean, the Thaqafite conquest of Sindh, the various Ghaznavid raids, and the Ghurid conquest in order to demonstrate the continuity of Islamic aggression in India and its slow progress due to what is thought of as Hindu resistance. So, this view emphasizes the fact that the Arabs failed to convert the people because of the strength of Hindu resistance and quote unquote the likes of which the Arabs had never before encountered in their wars of aggressive conquests in the 3 continents of the world. However, it is difficult to see this rationale behind this view that raids on Sindh and India by Muslim people starting from the early centuries CE up to the Ghurids were part of a single connected onslaught with a single motive to conquer India and to convert non-Muslims. The methods and motives of the raids on Sindh during the Caliph Osman 644-56 to Al-Hajjaj 694-713 and later Mahmud Ghazni 998-1031. All this vast period cannot be reduced to this single dimension. For example, the Arabs of Sindh responded to the invasion of the forces of Mahmud Ghaznavi by entering into alliances with certain surrounding Hindu states. This view is also based on this reading of the Sanskrit terms which occur in the epigraphs. So there are various Sanskrit terms in the sources. For example, Tajik, Mlech, Turushk, Yavan. These are read as all as meaning Arab Muslims. However, more detailed work has shown the different meanings of these terms. Tajik being Persian, Lech being non-Aryan, Turushka being Turk, Yavan being Greek, according to Derryl Maclean. A more careful examination of these terms was done by B.D. Chattopadhyay. We will study that a little later after we examine this issue of